The Pakistani Southern Belle Revisits the South, Part 3, The Hospitable Food by Nadia Elahi, published on June 26, 2023. Back in April, I traveled to the South, and as you know, I have shared some of that time with Parts 1 and 2 before taking a hiatus to share my thoughts on how Mindy Kaling and I do not look alike. Catch up here at this link if you're behind. But now I want to dive into Part 3. This will more than likely be the last part I share as far as the title, and as you can see, this will be about the hospitable food. Between my time in Atlanta, Monroe, my hometown, and then New Orleans, aka NOLA, I really had a wonderful time experiencing all the delicious cuisine that there was to devour, not to mention eating my Pakistani mother's home cooking as well. And with each food experience, I was deeply reminded of this thing called Southern hospitality. Much of my social media posts during this time included food pics more than anything else. In fact, after I went out with my longtime friend from college, Tanya, I was showing my mom and sister the pictures of our time together at dinner, which only included pictures of the food and then pictures of the food and only me in it. Both my mom and sister pointedly asked, "Where's a picture of you and Tanya?" Oops, I forgot. I made up later in the week with a snapshot of her and me out again. Obviously, the food was a huge highlight for me on this southern trip, but being back in the South was also eye-opening for me again after over a year since my last visit in 2021. As I live in Los Angeles now, I'm always struck by the generous hospitality when I go back to Monroe or the South in general. There is much to say about this regional hospitality. It's not lost on me, having been born and raised in the South, but living in LA for so long has dulled my senses a bit of this southern nicety that I had forgotten so much about. But for me, here in LA, I try to be hospitable as much as I can when I'm out in public. Occasionally, my hospitable nature can be tested when driving out here. I have a potty mouth. But overall, I really try to be as nice and kind to folks when I go out shopping or to dine. And I really do my best to be polite to all the cast and team members at Disneyland and Universal during my monthly escapes to the theme parks, making sure to always greet them and say their name as opposed to just, "Hey, you." This nicety is also not foreign to my Pakistani world. As a kid, I watched and learned from both my parents as they were impeccable hosts to anyone we had visiting our home. I also noticed this trait among other extended family members and fellow Desis too. I mean, it's hard to decline any food invitation from a Desi auntie. You don't want to insult her, trust me. But I think no matter where in the U.S. my family would have settled, the hospitable upbringing I had would still be a part of me. So after over a year being away from the South, my first outing in Atlanta was to the Rising Sun, a lovely breakfast and lunch spot in Decatur, Georgia, where my good friend Vanessa lives now, and where she took us for breakfast my first morning in this new Hollywood in the South. After all, Vanessa thought I needed to be thoroughly introduced to a plate of delicious Georgia grits. And I was very introduced, in fact, at least 4 more times later that week. Apparently, grits come with everything, not just shrimp. But at the Rising Sun, the polite greeting and hospitality of the server blew me away at first. I don't know if it was his delightful southern accent I hadn't heard in so long living in LA, or just how darn nice he was, but it took me by surprise at first when we sat down before the thought sunk back into my head. Oh, yes, this is how it's always been. They don't call it Southern hospitality for nothing. A picture here of my breakfast from the Rising Sun: grits, sausage, biscuit, and eggs. After 4 days in Atlanta, I headed to my hometown of Monroe, where my mom had a traditional home-cooked meal waiting for me, the Pakistani kind. Welcoming me after my flight was chicken curry, beef kofta, and handmade roti, a menu discussed beforehand between my mother and me, which included some of my favorites. We skipped the fried basmati rice as I told her I needed to watch my carb intake, as I knew the rest of the week would tempt me enough with all kinds of starchy carbs, not to mention all the grits I had already consumed in Georgia. When I devoured that first bite of my mom's cooking, I knew I was home. All the memories from the past flooded my taste buds. taking me back to countless times at the dinner table on most weeknights with my family when I was a kid in grade school, to my teens in high school, and then college and beyond. However, I noticed something with this meal. It wasn't very spicy. My mom has a vivid memory in her mind concerning a Christmas dinner once upon a time when I could barely eat the holiday meal as it was extra spicy, mainly to appease my dad and brother's spice levels, forgetting my taste buds wouldn't be able to handle that much heat. So this welcome home dinner was very tamed in spice. Oh, and to catch you up on what Christmas dinners were like for my Pakistani family and me, here's what I usually tell my American friends. For Thanksgiving dinner, we did, and still do, the whole turkey, dressing, and sweet potato casserole. Crunchy pecan topping, not that weird marshmallow thing. But for Christmas dinner, it's a traditional Pakistani meal with all the trimmings of curried garam masala meat dishes, basmati rice, kebabs, handmade rotis, and voila, we're back in my mom's hometown of Gujranwala, Pakistan. Anyway, Mom's dishes varied over the years, depending on what she wanted to try and or make at the time. But there was usually the traditional chicken biryani, another fave, plus other proteins in some form or fashion, beef and maybe goat or lamb too. So as I was devouring this home-cooked meal after the flight from Atlanta, I noticed, despite the delicious, yummy flavors, it wasn't very spicy. To be honest, there was no heat at all. I could also see the letdown in Kilby's face as my brother-in-law from Farmerville loves my mom's Pakistani cooking and spicy food. So, sure, yes. After that Christmas dinner when all the milk in the world wasn't enough to cool down the fire in my mouth, my mom toned it down for me. Sorry, Kelby, as I was the center of attention at this welcome home dinner after all. And then years after, I suffered with a bout of acid reflux, swearing off spicy food for good mostly. But finally, in recent years, I have come to find a balance with spicier foods and can handle more heat again. I still joke with friends how I'm an abomination to the Pakistani community by having a weak palate when it comes to spicy food. I mean, it's on the level of getting my Desi card revoked. I have Caucasian American friends, not from Louisiana, where spicy Cajun and Creole food is synonymous, who enjoy spicier food than I do. My verbose tale with this whole spicy bit. Mom, I can actually handle a bit more heat, so you can be more generous with the red pepper next time. A picture of Mom's curry chicken, beef kofta, and roti, plus the must salad of red onions, tomatoes, and cucumber. After the delicious Pakistani home-cooked meal, my eating adventures continued in the week with many Southern food delights. As previously mentioned, I had dinner with my college friend Tanya, and we went to Crawfish City, which, yes, by its title alone, specializes in the mudbugs, crayfish, crawdads, or as we simply call them in Louisiana, crawfish, the boiled kind where you rip or tear the head off from the tail to indulge in a somewhat tiny piece of meat, thus the need for the boiled corn and potatoes that accompany a large tray of about 3 to 4 pounds of the yummy crustacean. It really is more about the experience of eating the little suckers than the actual food for some folks. For me, I love both the taste and the experience. Plus, the potatoes and corn and sometimes the bite size of andouille sausage thrown in are half the delicious fun. A picture of crawfish, potatoes, and corn. Oh my! Later in the week, I decided to visit my local Irish pub, and yes, we have one in Monroe. It's called Enoch's Irish Pub and Grill, managed and owned by the very hospitable John Jeter, who always greets and welcomes me home when I visit the pub, where I ventured out in the early afternoon to sit at the bar, vodka soda with lemon in hand, laptop open, letting the creativity hit me from the liquid muse, all with the right kind of bar ambiance surrounding me. Later, friends and family met me for dinner as it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays, Enoch serves their 2-for-1 burger specials. And these just aren't any burgers. I mean, Guy Fieri needs to host diners, drive-ins, and dives at this pub. Enoch's is Flavor Town Guy. A picture of Enoch's burger with curry sauce. So good. I continued my food adventures in Monroe with mother-daughter time at the Warehouse No. 1 restaurant, which overlooks the Washita River and is a favorite of my mom's, plus my favorite spot for all-you-can-eat hush puppies. Then later, a must-visit to Parish, a restaurant owned by local celebrity chef Corey Barr, where I had some amazing seafood while visiting with old friends and making new ones, too. A picture of my sweet mom enjoying lunch at the warehouse, Washita River behind. For the weekend, I headed down to NOLA with my sister Mercy for a 3-day getaway before flying back to LA. The food in the French Quarter, where we only visited, obviously mirrored the delicious southern delights I had in both Atlanta and home in Monroe. But food aside, the hotel my sister and I stayed at, the French Market Inn, also included a hospitable staff who helped with all of our needs and/or questions in a way that made us feel at home, not to mention safe, as crime is pretty high in the city. But throughout our time in the French Quarter, I got to visit some more must places in the Big Easy as well, including a visit to the Spotted Cat for great live jazz music, cocktails at the Carousel Lounge and Bar in the Hotel Monteleone, plus grabbing a drink to go at my favorite, Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop Bar, nestled in a quiet part on the very busy and popular Rue Bourbon. A picture of Mercy and me enjoying cocktails in the Quarter. During these food and drink journeys, I got to spend wonderful time with my family, caught up with great old friends, Vanessa, French, Jen, GT, Tanya, Meredith, JP, Carla, Mel, Kyle, and Mark, plus visited the good, welcoming folks at New Iona Presbyterian Church where my family attends Sunday church services. By the way, before I attended church with my family that Sunday morning, we had breakfast at the newly opened Delta Biscuit Company in Monroe, where I had 2 cranberry mimosas with my eggs and fluffy biscuit. Yes, I was very buzzed during church. Now that's a way to do church. A picture of my mimosa ×2 before church. Sidebar. When I was drafting this post, I was reminded of how I love to have friends over where I cook, bake, roast, or grill up a feast, usually themed around a special viewing event with a television show or movie, if not the holidays. I think this post also speaks to my self-proclaimed foodie title as well. But mostly, especially, it speaks to my love of cooking and hosting folks over at my humble abode where I love to entertain with a huge spread of all things yummy and delicious. Many of my gatherings at my place are themed. Last fall, on most Sundays in September and October, I had friends over to watch House of the Dragon, the HBO Game of Thrones prequel, as I am a huge fan of the show and books. And for the season finale episode, I served up a feast fit for any king or queen of King's Landing. Planning the food menu is also half the fun for me, especially if it's for a favorite show of mine. Over many years, I've hosted my fair share of Oscar viewing parties, some of them with former co-hosts Vanessa or Mercy, fellow Southern ladies who are just as stellar with their hosting duties, where the food is centered around the films nominated. But I am a party of one most nights, so when I can have folks over, my Southern hospitable nurturing instincts come out, and no one leaves my home hungry. Between being Southern and Pakistani, it's in my blood to be the best possible hostess I can be. I sometimes even forget to eat because I'm so consumed with my guests' well-being, making sure they have enough to eat and drink. I get such immense pleasure feeding and hosting my friends. I'm reminded of how gracious and generous my mom and dad were when they hosted my friends for sleepovers or birthday parties, how they made them feel special, and I try to emulate that. Sidebar over. During all these Southern food excursions during my time in April, at each establishment in Atlanta, Monroe, and NOLA, I was blown away with the overwhelming hospitality from every server, host, and owner. For someone who has shared much of her feelings of inadequacies growing up in the South, as far as feeling alienated due to her skin color and Pakistani roots, I had forgotten how unique and special the American South can be. The culture and history of the South is deeply embedded with much history, much of it horrific. You know, that Civil War once upon a time for starters. But I think the one thing that can bring all people together, where one's politics doesn't matter, and bridging a divide in a still much divided country, is food, and yes, good old hospitality, which is what I love the most about the South. I don't know if the sweet Southern accents of the people serving me at the restaurants or bars played a part, or the fact that these people are truly, genuinely nice. Regardless, it was very refreshing and humbling to experience it all, reminding me once again there is no place like home. The last picture here is me and my date, a crawfish.